The minister smiled at me, his voice a low hum in the quiet chapel. "Amelia, do you take Alex?" The words "I do" were right there, on the tip of my tongue, a breath away from being spoken. That's when the heavy oak doors at the back of the chapel slammed open. Every single person turned. A whole sea of faces in their Sunday best, all looking toward the back. I didn't even need to turn around. I knew who it was. I knew it in my bones, the way you know the shape of a monster from a recurring nightmare. But I turned anyway. My body moved on its own, pulled by a terrible magnetic force. And there he was, Justin. He stood in the doorway, framed by the bright afternoon sun. He looked thinner than I remembered, and his suit was rumpled, like he had driven all night to get here. But it was his face that made it hard to breathe. It was a strange mix of sad and eerily calm. This wasn't the screaming, explosive anger I had always secretly feared might come for me one day. This was colder, sharper. It was the calm that comes after a hurricane has already flattened everything, when there's nothing left to do but walk through the wreckage. My fiancé, my beautiful, kind Alex, squeezed my hand. His thumb rubbed gentle circles over my knuckles, a calming gesture that did nothing to calm me. "Who is that?" he whispered, his voice more confused than alarmed. He probably thought it was a drunk friend, or some kind of bizarre wedding prank. His world was too good and clean for this kind of darkness. My own voice was stuck in my throat. I couldn't answer. I could only watch as Justin took a step into the chapel. The sound of his shoes on the stone floor was like a countdown, each step bringing my carefully built life closer to ruin. "Don't marry her, Alex," Justin's voice rang out. It was clear and steady, without the shaking I would have expected. His words carried to every corner of the church, each one a perfectly aimed stone. He wasn't yelling. He was making a statement. A low murmur went through the guests. I saw Alex's mother, a stern-looking woman in a blue dress, lean toward her husband, her lips a thin, disapproving line. My own father stood up, his face red with anger. "What is the meaning of this? Who are you? Get out of this chapel immediately." Justin's eyes never left mine. Those deep, dark eyes that had once looked at me with so much love were now hard and empty. "I'm the ghost at this feast," he said, taking another step. "I'm the man she destroyed to get here." Alex moved to stand slightly in front of me. A protective gesture that only made the guilt in my stomach twist into a hot, tight knot. "You need to leave. Now, before I call security." "I will," Justin said, his gaze finally flicking to Alex. For a second I saw something that looked like pity in his eyes. "But he deserves to know who he's about to promise his life to. You all do." He raised his hand, and in it was a small black digital audio recorder. In his hand, it looked like a weapon. "You all see Amelia, the successful businesswoman, the philanthropist, the perfect bride. But this life she has, this wedding, it's all built on a foundation of bones." My blood ran cold. My vision started to get narrow, like I was looking through a tunnel. Not that. Please, God, not that specific thing. Anything but that. "I bet she hasn't told you about the Hudsons," Justin said to the room, his voice like a lawyer, giving his closing argument. "About Hudson and Sons Manufacturing? It was a good company, an honest company. It employed half our town for 50 years. My father was their chief financial officer for 20 of them." He took another step, now halfway down the aisle. The air was so thick with tension it was hard to breathe. I could see the confusion on Alex's face starting to change into a sick, dawning horror. He looked from Justin to me, his brow furrowed, silently asking me to explain, to say something. "And I bet she hasn't told you about the night of the fire," Justin continued, his voice dropping, becoming more personal, more chilling. "The fire at the Hudson factory that burned it to the ground. The fire that was ruled an accident. Faulty wiring, they said. A tragic misfortune." He paused, letting the words sink in. Then he looked directly at me, and the calm expression on his face finally cracked, showing the raw, bottomless pain underneath. "But it wasn't an accident, was it, Amelia? Tell them. Tell Alex what you told me on this recording, the night I found out, the night you finally admitted what you did." He pressed a button on the recorder, and out of the small device, my own voice filled the holy space. It was me, but a younger me, a me I had tried to kill and bury for a decade. I was crying, hysterical, but the words were horribly, undeniably clear. "I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt," my recorded voice sobbed, echoing off the stone walls. "It was just supposed to be a small fire, in the records office, just to destroy the patent files before the merger. My father's company was going under, Justin. We were going to lose everything. I was just trying to save us." A gasp went through the chapel. It wasn't a sound of surprise. It was a hungry, consuming sound. They were feeding on my downfall. I saw my mother's face turn white, her hand flying to her mouth. I saw Alex's hand drop from mine as if my skin had suddenly turned red hot. He slowly, numbly, turned to look at me, his eyes wide with a question so full of pain it shattered what was left of my heart. Justin's voice cut through the ringing in my ears. "She didn't just destroy some files. That small fire spread. The wind picked up. It took the whole factory. It took my father's life savings, everything he had worked his whole life for. It took Mr. Hudson's will to live. He hanged himself 6 months later, leaving a wife and 2 children with nothing. It destroyed dozens of families. She talks about saving her family? She built her fortune on the ashes of mine." He stopped, standing now just a few feet from the altar. He dropped the recorder onto the stone floor, where it clattered and fell silent. The silence that followed was 1,000 times louder, filled with judgment and disgust. "So, go on," Justin whispered, his face a mask of broken victory. "Say the words. Say, 'I do. I dare you.' But how did we get here? How did a day that was supposed to be the beginning of my perfect, forever, become a public execution?" It didn't start with a fire. It started, as most disasters do, with love and desperation. Let's start at the real beginning. 10 years ago, I wasn't Amelia. I was just Amy, a 22-year-old watching my father's life's work circle the drain. Our family business, Prescott Innovations, made specialized mechanical parts. My father was a brilliant engineer, but a terrible businessman. He trusted people too much. He still believed in handshake deals in a world of corporate sharks. And we were being eaten alive by one of those sharks, Hudson and Sons. I remember the night the reality of our situation truly hit me. I was home from college, and I found my dad in his study, staring at a letter. He looked smaller, older. "They got the big aerospace contract," he said, his voice hollow. "The one we've had for 15 years. Hudson underbid us by 30%. I don't know how they can even make a profit at that price." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading for an answer I didn't have. "It's over, Amy. They're too big, too aggressive. They're going to bleed us dry." That was just the start. A few months later, they filed a series of patents that would make our entire product line worthless. Bankruptcy wasn't a maybe. It was a when. My father stopped sleeping. My mother started drinking more sherry during the day, her laughter becoming brittle and loud. The pressure in our house was a physical thing. I was their only child, the brilliant daughter who had graduated top of her class in business. I was supposed to have the answers. And late one night, surrounded by piles of financial reports, I found one. A terrible, desperate, world-altering answer. I discovered a loophole in the merger agreement that would give Hudson total market control. The deal was dependent on their new patents being unencumbered. If the physical paper files of those patents were to be damaged or destroyed before the final signing, a clause in the contract would delay everything for months. It would be just enough time for my father to pivot to a new design we had on the back burner, enough time to survive. It was a monstrous thought. At first, I pushed it away, but it kept coming back. I started researching, telling myself it was just a mental exercise. The Hudson factory was an old building on the industrial side of town. I found its blueprints online. The patent records were in a small, separate office, a brick building connected to the main factory by a covered walkway. Security was a single, aging guard who made his rounds every 2 hours. The plan formed in my mind, piece by insane piece. A small, contained fire, a bit of wiring, a timer, some flammable liquid. No one would be there at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. It would look like an electrical fault. The records would be gone. Prescott Innovations would have a fighting chance. It was a victimless crime, I told myself. It was just paper. I was saving my family. I was being the daughter my father needed me to be. Right and wrong felt like luxuries I couldn't afford. I didn't tell a soul. For a week, I was a ghost, meticulously planning, my heart a constant, dull thud of fear and adrenaline. I bought the supplies from 3 different hardware stores in neighboring towns, paying in cash. I wore gloves. I felt like a character in a movie. The night I did it is a blur of terrifyingly clear details. The cold sweat on my skin despite the summer heat, the sharp smell of gasoline on my hands, the loud click of the timer in the dead silence, the sprint back to my car, my lungs burning. I drove to a hill a mile away and waited, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. And then I saw it. Not the small puff of smoke I expected from the records office, but a horrifying, blossoming orange glow that began to eat the entire complex. The wind. I hadn't thought about the wind. A strong gust had turned my small, precise crime into a raging monster. It had carried the flames from the office, across the walkway, and into the main factory, which was full of flammable oils and materials. I watched, paralyzed with horror, as the legacy of one family was devoured by a fire I had set to save my own. I threw up on the side of the road, my body convulsing with what I had done. The news reports the next day were devastating. The factory was a total loss. Dozens of people were out of a job overnight. The Hudson family was ruined. The fire marshal ruled it faulty wiring in the old administrative building. A tragic accident. My father's company, as I had predicted, got its second chance. We survived. We even thrived. But the guilt was a cancer in my soul. Every success felt like it was paid for with blood money. Every night, I saw the flames. 2 years later, I met Justin. I was at a fundraiser, a new version of myself. I was Amelia now, poised, confident, the rising star of Prescott Innovations. I had forced the guilt down, locked it in a box, and buried it deep. He was across the room, and I felt his eyes on me. His gaze was different, intense, searching. He introduced himself, Justin Carter, an architect. He had a kind smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, which held a deep, settled sadness I recognized because I saw it in my own reflection every morning. We talked for hours. There was an instant connection, a spark of understanding that I hadn't felt with anyone. It was on our 3rd date that he told me about his family. My dad used to be the CFO for Hudson and Sons, he said, stirring his coffee, his eyes distant. Maybe you've heard of them? My blood turned to ice water. I managed a neutral nod, my heart hammering against my ribs. I think so. They had that fire a few years back, right? So tragic. Tragic doesn't cover it, he said, his voice flat. It destroyed us. My dad lost his pension, his savings, everything. He had a heart attack a year later. The doctors said it was stress. My mom, she's never been the same. He looked up at me, and I saw that raw sadness in his eyes again. The Hudsons lost even more. Mr. Hudson killed himself, left a wife and 2 kids, all because of some old faulty wire. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of the table. Here he was, the living embodiment of my crime, and he was sitting across from me, looking at me with gentle, trusting eyes. I should have ended it right there. I should have run and never looked back. But I was a coward, and I was falling in love. For 5 years, we built a life together. We moved in, we adopted a dog, we talked about marriage, and for 5 years, I lived a lie. The guilt manifested in ugly ways. I would start fights over nothing. I became paranoid, obsessively checking the locks at night. Once he made a casual joke about playing with fire, and I flinched so violently I knocked a glass of wine all over him. He knew something was haunting me, but he thought it was a demon from my past, not a demon of my own making. He tried harder, loved me more, which only made the lie heavier. The end came on a rainy Tuesday night, almost 7 years to the day of the fire. The stupid fight that started it all was about a vacation. He wanted to go to a quiet cabin in the woods. I wanted a bustling city in Europe. It became a symbol of everything I was running from. He accused me of being unable to sit still, to just be with him. He was right. "I don't get it, Amy," he said, his voice cracking with frustration and hurt. "I love you more than anything. I would do anything for you. Just tell me what's wrong. What are you so afraid of? We can fix it. I know we can." And I broke. The dam of lies and guilt that I had maintained for 7 years finally burst. I was sobbing, a hysterical, ugly cry that came from the depths of my rotten soul. And through the tears, I told him everything, every sordid detail. The planning, the gasoline, the timer, the horrifying orange glow. I told him how I had watched his family's world burn. I don't know what I expected. Anger, screaming. I got something worse. Silence. He just stared at me, his face completely white. The love in his eyes died right in front of me. It didn't just vanish. It was extinguished, leaving behind cold ash. It was the look of a man realizing the person he loved never really existed. He didn't say a word. He just stood up, went into the bedroom, and packed a bag. As he was walking to the door, I grabbed his arm, my tears making my words a mess. "Justin, please, I love you. It was a mistake. I was a kid. I was trying to save my family." He finally looked at me, his face a mask of cold disgust. "My father was a good man," he said, his voice a dead whisper. "Mr. Hudson was a good man. You're not a kid, Amelia. You're a ghoul. You've been feeding on my love, my forgiveness, for something you never deserved." He pulled his arm away from my touch as if I were diseased. I was so hysterical, so desperate, that I screamed the words that would later be my public undoing. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. It was just supposed to be a small fire, in the records office, just to destroy the patent files before the merger. My father's company was going under, Justin. We were going to lose everything. I was just trying to save us. I didn't know his phone in his jacket pocket was silently recording our entire conversation. He'd told me earlier he was using its voice memo app to record design ideas, a detail I forgot in my panic, a detail that would become the loaded gun in my future. He left without another word. I collapsed onto the floor and stayed there until morning, surrounded by the wreckage of the only pure thing I had ever had. The year after Justin left was a hollowed-out existence. I threw myself into work, becoming the ruthless, efficient machine everyone at Prescott Innovations wanted me to be. I buried Amy and her guilt so deep I almost convinced myself she was gone for good. Then I met Alex. He was a pediatric surgeon, a man who spent his days mending broken children. He was handsome, but it was his fundamental goodness that drew me in. Alex's life had been one of privilege and light. He saw the world in black and white, right and wrong. There was no gray. He represented a clean slate, a life scrubbed free of sin. He never dug into my past. He accepted the simple story I gave him, a painful breakup with a man named Justin, an ex I preferred not to talk about. To Alex, Justin was just a footnote. When he proposed on a trip to Paris under a shower of stars, it felt like my redemption was complete. The ring on my finger was a shield. The life he offered was a fortress. I convinced myself I deserved it. I had paid my penance with years of silent guilt. It was time for my happiness. The wedding planning was a grand affair. My mother, ecstatic, went into overdrive. The venue was a historic stone chapel on his family's estate. The dress was custom. It was a fairy tale. But as the day grew closer, small, unsettling things began to happen. An anonymous email with just a picture of the old Hudson factory, blackened and skeletal, with the subject line, "Remember." A single dead rose left on the windshield of my car. I tried to tell Alex, but he brushed it off. "You're a successful woman, Amelia. You're bound to have jealous enemies. Don't let them get to you." He was so full of love and excitement that his light burned away my shadows. I clung to him and pushed the fear down. The morning of the wedding was perfect. The sun was shining, my bridesmaids were giddy with champagne, and my father, beaming with pride, told me he had never been happier. As I slipped into my gown, I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw Amelia, the bride. For a fleeting moment, I almost believed it. Walking down the aisle, seeing Alex waiting for me, his eyes shining with love, was the most profoundly beautiful moment of my life. For one perfect, shimmering instant, I was free. The ceremony was beautiful. Alex's vows were so full of promises of honesty and trust that tears streamed down my face. They were tears of grief for the woman I could have been if I had deserved him. Then it was my turn. The minister smiled at me. "Amelia, do you take Alex to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The words caught in my throat. And that's when the doors slammed open. That's when my carefully constructed world, built on ashes and lies, came crashing down. When Justin dropped that recorder, the silence in the chapel was absolute. Every eye was on me, not with sympathy, but with morbid curiosity. They were looking at a monster. Alex hadn't moved. He just stared at me, his face a perfect blank mask of shock. The question in his eyes was a silent, desperate plea for me to deny it. Finally he spoke. His voice was a hoarse whisper. "Amelia, is it true?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I could only manage a single pathetic nod. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. The love, the trust, the future, it all crumbled to dust in his eyes. The light went out, replaced by a look of such profound disgust that it physically knocked the breath out of me. He slowly, deliberately, pulled his hand away from mine. Then he turned, without another word, and walked down the aisle, past the gawking guests, past Justin, who stood aside like a grim reaper, and out the heavy oak doors, shutting them softly behind him. He didn't run, he just left. The sound of his departure broke the spell. A cacophony of whispers erupted. Alex's parents shot me a look of pure hatred before following their son. My own friends, my bridesmaids, couldn't meet my eyes. I was left standing at the altar, a spectacle in a ridiculously expensive white dress. Justin was still there, watching me. The look of victory on his face was gone, replaced by an unnerving emptiness. "Was it worth it?" he asked quietly, his voice raw. I didn't answer. I just stood there, numb, as my perfect day became my public stoning. The aftermath was a quiet disaster. The guests melted away. My father led me out a side door. The ride home was silent. Later that night, he came to my room. "I never asked," he said, his voice thick with shame. "I should have. I knew something wasn't right. I let you carry this. I am so sorry, Amy." It was the closest to an admission we ever had. I didn't see Alex again. He sent a friend to pack his things a few days later. The only communication I received was a legal document delivered by a courier. It was an application for an annulment on the grounds of fraud. The story was everywhere, a juicy piece of gossip for the whole city. The board of directors at Prescott Innovations called an emergency meeting and asked for my resignation. I gave it without a fight. My father was forced to step down as well. The company we had sacrificed our souls for was now in the hands of strangers. I saw Justin one last time, about a month later. I was sitting in a park when he sat on the other end of the bench. We didn't speak for a long time. "I heard about your job," he said finally. I nodded. "I'm sorry about that," he said. It sounded genuine. I wanted him to know. I wanted everyone to know what you had built your life on." "You succeeded," I said, my voice flat. He sighed, a long, weary sound. "It doesn't feel like I thought it would. I thought I would feel free, vindicated, but I just feel empty." "Join the club," I whispered. He finally turned to look at me. "Do you ever think about what would have happened," he asked, his voice soft, "if you had just let your father's company fail?" It was a question I had asked myself 1,000 times, in the dark. If I had just accepted failure, accepted a different, harder life. My father would have been humbled, not broken. I would have been poor, but my soul would have been my own. I would have met Justin, and I would have been worthy of his love. We would have had a real life, not a fantasy built on a crime. "Every day," I answered. He nodded, then stood up to leave. "Goodbye, Amy," he said, using my old name. It felt like a final turning of a page. And then, he was gone. I don't know what the future holds. I have no job, no fiancé, no friends. The life I spent a decade building is gone, reduced to rubble. All I have left is the ghost of a girl named Amy and the ashes of a woman named Amelia. Justin's revenge wasn't just about exposing my secret. It was about forcing me to finally face myself, without the money, the status, or the love I had used as a shield. In the devastating silent ruin, for the first time, I am forced to see the truth. The fire I set all those years ago never went out. It's been burning inside me all this time, and it has finally consumed everything.